realized after recently creating my tutorial on how to use Procreate to design patterns for collage quilting, as I was going through that process, I realized, wow, the editing and the getting everything synced up, that whole process was very time intensive. So I'm exploring new options that will hopefully create a smooth experience for everyone and reduce the amount of time that I spend editing. So be patient as I use OBS today for the first time. So on to the topic of fabric cards and postcards. I've recently been obsessed with making these. Both 6x6 inch cards that go into envelopes and also postcards. I think that they are fun. They're an easy project to finish quickly, and then when you give them or make them with a person in mind, it creates that connection with them, which I think is really special. So here in the bottom you see a fabric collage postcard that I made of my sister's dog Houston, and I turned it into a postcard and just added this paper to the backing so that I can mail it, write a message and mail it. And then on the top of the screen, you have an example of a 6x6 inch card that I made. That was actually foundation paper pieced using a pattern by Christy Lee of Quiet Play. Her Instagram handle is Quiet Play. And she made that pattern. It's very cute. And I used that pattern to create this little mini card. So you can make these cards in different ways. You can use foundation paper piecing like the one on top. You can use fabric collage. And then today I'm going to just show you a very simple raw edge applique process that you can use. The goal of the tutorial is more about showing you how to create the actual postcard than focusing on the front, but I figured I would go ahead and show you an applique version. I am not an artist, so I just designed something super simple for this example. This form is actually on my blog. It's linked on my blog. You can download it. It's something that I created. And the top portion I used to design what the postcard is going to look like eventually. And actually, you can see my erasure marks, or maybe you can't, but trust me, I went through several versions of it and just erased right on the sheet. There's no reason for it to be clean and neat. But then once you have your final penciled version, I go ahead and go over it with Sharpie. And the reason I do that is to save paper, I just print the entire form on cardstock, and then I hold it up to a window or a light pad. You can put it on a light box, either way. I use windows just because it's super short and I don't want to get my light box out. But if it's with Sharpie, I will still be able to see through and be able to trace from the reverse once a light source is behind it. And then you just need any kind of double-sided fusible. I have Heat and Bond Light in my cabinet right now, so that is what I'm using today, but it doesn't have to be Heat and Bond Light. So you can see that I have already traced the reverse image onto the paper side of my fusible. And I used it up against a window. You can see a picture of that in the blog. So those are the letters. And so again, that mirror image is what you can see. So that the reverse side will end up looking correctly once you've fused it to fabric. And here's my background, that little streak or whatever that will go behind my letters. So this rainbow fabric I'm going to use for the background of the postcard. And then I'm going to use this teal fabric, and you want to put the right side down. So the wrong side of the fabric up. And I'm using this for my letters. So I'm going to go ahead and put my letters down. And you want the rough side that has the glue to go down, and then the paper side that's smoother to go up. And actually it's a little bit larger than my strip. I like to fuse it when it still has some edges of the paper around it because I feel like it fuses better, and then I cut the paper off in a later state. So then you're gonna take about 3 seconds to fuse it down. Actually gonna iron my background piece too. Oh, it's hot. Let's set that aside for a second. And I'm going to go ahead and trim the paper around the design that I traced. And just to save some fabric. If it's smaller, I will waste less fabric. And then fusing it down, I kind of run over the entire thing and it sticks a little, and then I go back and do a good 3-second press on each part of it. 3 seconds varies. It depends on the kind of fusible you're using. Follow the instructions on your fusible. And today, in general, 3 seconds works in my classroom, so that's what I use today, and it seems to be working. And then I use my fabric scissors at this point to first trim the whole section off of my fat quarter, just to kind of clean it up and make it easier. And then I trim exactly on the lines. And I use my scissors for this part, even though there's paper involved. I know that that can be controversial, but so far it has worked for me. But I don't do a lot of this type of applique, so my scissors don't have that much exposure to the paper. Getting inside the curves can be tricky, just take your time. So my letters are now done. And so now I'm going to go for the little splash of orange in the background. Cut out the 2 horizontal edges. So you have the background of my postcard being the rainbow patterned fabric, and then this splash of orange. And then the letters are going to go on top. So I'm going to start by peeling off the paper on the orange splash. Just kind of rip it apart here. I use the point of my scissors just to get it started, and then it comes off pretty easy. And double check my pattern to make sure I have the streak going the correct way. It's always good to reference the pattern. And I'll set it here so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. So that initial jagged edge is matching what I'm creating. So that's what I did. So the orange fabric is actually a little bit bigger than what I traced because I know I'm going to trim it later. And then I know for sure that I have enough. And then doing my little 3-second press over all of the areas. Little ironing for good measure. And now I'm going to speed through the process of doing the letters. I should have mentioned this earlier, but you want the shiny side down when you place the fabric, because the shiny side is going to be the fusible. And I'm referencing the part of that particular zigzag to know exactly where to put my letters. I like to kind of lay them all out before I actually press and take a look at it. Again, you don't have to follow the pattern at this point. I'm the one who created the pattern, so I can decide to change it at this point. You know, play with maybe making the letters bounce back and forth a little bit, add some movement, you know, just kind of play with it until you feel like you like what you are seeing. And I am now satisfied, and so I'm going to just do all the letters at once. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just make sure they're down. It's very hot. Let's try to cool it off a little bit and just check to make sure that the edges are down. So I think it has fused on here pretty well. And so now this is exact same process as if you created this fabric piece with foundation paper piecing or with collage or traditional piecing. It doesn't matter. It's just important that you make that top of your fabric a little bit bigger than your finished postcard size. So I'm making a 4 by 6 inch postcard. So I'm going to trim this to 5 by 7 so that I have a 1/2 inch on all of the sides to turn under. So I'm going to start with the 5-inch cut first, and I'm going to try to balance it so that I have the same, within the 5 inches, I have the same amount of background showing on either end. Here I have about 1 inch above and about 1 inch below. So cut the lower edge. And then cut the opposite edge here. All right. Need a new rotary cutter blade. So now for the 7-inch, I actually need a different ruler because this is only 6.5 inches long, but I am, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to kind of like fudge it a little bit here. So I'm going to cut this side and then line it up on my cutting mat. Make sure it's balanced, and then cut the other side. So now I have a 5-inch by 7-inch square. I like to trim it very precisely at this point because it makes it easier to center the Peltex that I use to add structure to my postcards. So there we have it, a little 5 by 7 fabric creation that's been fused together but not stitched at this point. So like I said, we're going to fold the fabric over a 1/2 inch. So I go ahead and draw a line just with a pencil, a 1/2 inch up from the bottom edge and a 1/2 inch in from one of the side edges. And then that becomes my reference point for placing what I use on the inside of my postcards. This is Fusible on one side and just regular, it's kind of a little bit soft on the other side. It's called Peltex 71F, F for Fusible. So, and you know, it's Pellon is the brand name. So Pellon Peltex 71F. And I've cut this to exactly 4 by 6 inches. And if you're cutting it off of the bolt or off of a strip that's been cut off the bolt, if you do 6 inches, if you do a 6-inch cut from the edge, it ends up almost perfect with 4-inch postcards. There's just a tiny bit left over. And I just cut a whole strip of them. So these are the 4 by 6, and then I'll have another strip that is the 6 by 6. And so again, we have the fusible edge down towards the front of your fabric, and you just line it up on those 1/2 inch marks, and that should get it exactly centered if you've cut your fabric to be 1 inch larger than your Peltex. Wish me luck. All right, so the tricky part is that it will fuse better if you are ironing from the fabric side because it's less thick. But the problem is as you turn it over, it has a tendency to shift. So I try to line it up exactly on those lines, and then I just try to be really careful as I flip it over and spread my fingers out to kind of hold it in place, and then I fuse it. I do not follow the directions on the Peltex. You're supposed to use a damp pressing cloth, but I don't do that because I don't want it to affect the top of my postcard. And I found that for the purposes of making the postcard, it fuses just fine with a hot dry iron. So yeah, it is almost exactly, it's hot, but it's almost exactly in the right place. Good enough. And so now there are actually many different ways to do the next part. And this is the part where my process comes in, and that's my goal as far as showing you today. So a lot of people will add batting onto the fabric that they're going to use, quilt it, and then put that on top of the Peltex. I skipped that stage, and I just put the Peltex directly onto my fabric top and then quilt it. Another option is you can trim the top of your fabric to exactly the measurements of the Peltex and then use a satin stitch or a zigzag stitch to finish the edges. And then some people will turn the fabric over like I'm going to show you and then satin stitch or a zigzag stitch. So you have a lot of options. There are a lot of different ways. In my blog, I will put some links of some of my favorite websites, places that I have learned and experimented with to give you some ideas, because you don't have to do it my way. A big reason why I do it this way is because my primary machine is a Juki and it's a straight stitch machine, and I do not have time or inclination to set up my other machine. And the other reason that I do it this way is because I like not having a firm border or edge that a satin stitch or a zigzag stitch will visually create. But at the same time, like doing the zigzag, doing the satin stitch turns out some really cute postcards. I've even seen people bind them, which is problematic for mailing them, but an option. So what I do is I just fuse the Peltex to the fabric and I quilt it. And so for today, just for the speed of this tutorial, I'm just going to straight stitch around the edges, but you can free motion quilt Peltex. You can create different designs. You can do all kinds of things. Even like around the edges, you could use more traditional machine applique stitches like a blanket stitch. And using that blanket stitch will create a visual that looks similar to hand applique. And all of those are options at this point. So feel free to play and experiment with your machine, even using different embroidery stitches. For today, I'm going to be straight stitching. For the letters, I'm going to use a pretty tiny stitch size because that will help me negotiate the turns without creating like really strong angles. So let me switch up the camera and hopefully you'll be able to see. So I'm going to start in the middle of my postcard, which is always a good idea. And I'm going to use a 1.5 really tiny stitch length, but I think it will help me get around the curves. When I start quilting in this way, I don't backstitch, because if you backstitch and then go forward, go all the way around the letter, cross over what you backstitched and then go back again, you're going to end up with 4 layers of thread buildup. And it makes your start and stop really more obvious. So what I do is I don't backstitch at the start. I go all the way around the letter. Then I stitch just a couple stitches over where I started at the end and then backstitch. So you only have 3 layers at that point and it's only for a couple stitches. And so it's just a lot easier to mask your start and stop. And right now I'm going to trim where I started that thread because I don't want it to get tangled up later when I finish the letter and create more thread buildup. You can see me going around the S, and I'm back to my original starting place at this point. So I'm just going to go a couple stitches over my starting point. That will be enough to secure those letters. Back stitch, and then I'm done. It's hard to see, but it's done. Not bad. And again, if you're using fancier stitches on the machine, it will add a lot. I'm keeping it plain and simple, and it's fine. It looks good. It's easier to see the color contrast and things like that, but please feel free to experiment with different stitches when you make yours, because it can be a really fun feature. When I'm going around the curves, you'll see me lifting my presser foot slightly and adjusting a lot. The more you adjust, then the fewer like really strong jagged edges you'll get as you're going around your curve. It'll just end up with a smoother finish. So I did the U, I did the G and did the U, and I'm back now to the final letter, which is an H. The H is the only one of these letters that have really clear right angles. On my machine, occasionally when I'm making a right angle turn, it won't actually catch the stitch that's in the exact corner. And so it ends up like going across instead of a crisp right angle, and I do not like that. So what I found to resolve that problem is right before or after I turn it, I just rotate the presser foot slightly forward and it will catch that thread. I don't lift my needle up, I just push the needle a little bit forward, and it'll catch that stitch in the corner and give me really crisp angles. Now, had I added batting to this quilt design, it would have added a little more puff. Just be careful. Later in the video, I'm going to explain to you how to mail these and what postage to use and those kinds of things. But a key factor is that the overall thickness, once you're completely done, it needs to be 1/4 inch or less, or it will not be able to be mailed. So if you do use batting, use a low loft batting or densely quilt it so that the overall thickness of your finished postcard stays under 1/4 inch. I do suggest experimenting with batting because I made some with batting, and it adds a little bit, and it's a nice effect. So please do experiment and see what you like. For the edges of the orange splash, I'm going to use a bigger stitch. So I'm going to move my stitch size up to 3. I don't backstitch at the start because those are going to be turned under, so I feel pretty safe. And I just noticed that my tension is a little bit tight, so my top tension, so I'm adjusting that so my stitches look nice and precise. If you do accidentally go too far, just backstitch 1. I find that's less obvious than stopping and restarting. And so there's my zigzag. And just gonna work on the other side now. And so from the back, you can see the quilting that I've done. Just simple straight stitching down the edges. And once you turn over the top edge, that is what it's going to look like. So for the next step, we've quilted the inside. You could always add more quilting. You could add echo lines, you could free motion, you could get all kinds of crazy and creative, but I am going to keep this simple. And so as you finish your postcard using my process, there are 2 options. Both of them involve turning the edges, wrapping the edges of the fabric over the outside edges, and then you can stitch them down like I did in this postcard of Houston, or you can not stitch them and just have a really clean edge that just waterfalls over the edge of your Peltex. For this particular postcard, if I stitched around the edges, it's going to cross over that orange splash. And I don't want to do that. I want the orange splash to look very distinct from the background and have nothing blurring it together. So I am going to leave my edges unstitched. And just a reminder, this is how I personally finish them, primarily because I have a straight stitch machine and don't like a tight, firm visual border. So this is how I secure it. But there are other options and you should explore those. So I'm going to first glue down the edge using Elmer's glue, and I'm going to glue in the seam allowance as well as across the Peltex. So the only thing you need to really pay attention to at this point is in the seam allowance, you want to kind of have the fabric come in just a little bit at an angle because it will make turning over the connecting edges a little bit easier later. So along the Peltex, you just follow the edge of the Peltex, but on the edges, pull it in just a little bit. It'll create a tiny bubble, but you won't see that when the postcard is finished. So just pull that edge in just slightly. And then I iron mine because it dries super fast. Whoops, almost lost that edge. Get it back in where I want it. It makes the Elmer's glue dry really fast and I can move on. And my iron is relatively clean. I've been doing this for a while and knock on wood, I have not dirtied up the bottom of my iron from the Elmer's glue. It may be because of the particular underside of my Luso iron. I don't know, but I haven't had any problems with it yet. You could use a pressing sheet if you are worried about that. So dried that side up nice and fast, and you can see the edges are just slightly curving in. There's that tiny pleat, but that doesn't matter. And the edge angling in will make it so when you turn this over in the next step, you won't see that tab from the front. It'll just tuck in nicely behind and will make the top of your postcard look really nicely finished. I'm doing the other side here, and then once that is ironed down, we're gonna turn in the opposite sides. And again, just pay really close attention to the corners and make sure that nothing ends up poking out from the front of the postcard, because you just want it to look super nice and clean. This actually is a little bit harder because it has the orange fabric that has the Fusible in the back. So it's a little thick, so I might press it a little bit longer. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell, it's kind of hard to see, but it's just slightly in from the edge, from the outer edge, and that is going to make your postcard look really good from the front. So on this side, as I'm ironing, I noticed it's even a little bit harder. So I got out my tailor's clapper, because the corner of the edge, as I turned over the short side, the long side corner started coming undone, which was I was gonna be able to see that from the front. So I restarted from the edges, turned it under, and then put the clapper on top of it, because it will keep it hot longer, and then as it gradually cools, it will seal it in a little bit better. I love my clapper. It was beautiful and a little expensive, but you can get cheaper ones as well. So there is your finished top. Pretty cute, very simple. You know, it's super simple design, but still turned out very charming. And obviously at this point you cannot write on the back of your postcard. So I will show you what you can do. So you can put a blank piece of paper or use the template that I've provided in my blog. Just download that link, and you're going to cut this out of cardstock. When you're cutting, if you make several repeated short cutting snips, it's easier for it to look jagged. But if you use long, slow cutting slips that use the full length of the scissors, it's going to end up, it's easier to get it to look a lot more smooth. So I cut in until I'm at the edge, and then I cut the full length of the scissors. And trim all four sides until you have that. And now you have to be really careful. I'm about 50-50 for accidentally gluing the postcard portion upside down on the back. So try to keep the top of your front with the top of your postcard and have them match up. That's the recommended approach. Okay. And so now it's looking good, it's looking even. And so I'm going to glue it on. When you glue the paper, I never use the iron. I do use my iron to iron papers when I'm reusing English paper piecing papers that have gotten crumpled up. So you can iron paper, but this is not an instance when you want to do that, because if you iron the Elmer's glue underneath the paper, you'll be able to see really distinct ridges where your glue marks were. It's not as smooth. And so what I do is when I'm applying the glue, I try to keep it very light and very smooth and no real thick lines, because those will end up showing through once it dries on the paper, and ironing accentuates that. So you'll notice I start by adding glue around all four edges, because I do want the edges of the paper to seal really well with the edges of the fabric. And then once I've gotten around all of the edges, I kind of fill in the center kind of the way I decorate sugar cookies, in like a circular movement, and just try to like even out so there's no like thick clumps or lines. You could use a paintbrush at this point, but I don't. I find that just using a thinner lines and spread out evenly and going back and kind of smoothing out any really thick globs works out well for me. All right. So now the tricky part is lining it up. So I start along the top and I try not to have the bottom like actually pressed down. So I get the top lined up side to side and along the top vertical edge, and then the rest of it will just fall into place really easily as long as you cut everything the right size. And I like to kind of just give it a press all along to kind of like flatten out those glue lines on the inside. And then you have a finished postcard, and that is it. So for the 6 by 6 inch greeting cards, just wanted to add just a few tips for that. I cut my Peltex at 5.5 by 5.5 inches. And the reason I do that is because my envelopes are exactly 6 by 6 inches. And so if you are making a postcard that has a bit of a thickness to it, it will not fit. If it's made at 6 by 6, it's not going to fit in the 6 by 6 inch envelope because of the added bulk. So I go ahead and make the postcard a 5.5 inch square. And then with the thickness of the fabric and the quilting and all that, it will still fit inside of the envelope, as you see here. It's a pretty nice fit, goes in easily, and then it turns over easily. Turns out pretty good. Okay, so the last thing that I just wanted to talk a little bit about is mailing these postcards. And to be honest, I use this project a lot with my students. They love to make quick postcards for their family and friends. And I make them give them to me and I send them in the mail. And the families are always super excited to get them through the mail. I've probably mailed maybe 10 postcards so far. And I've have a running streak. All of them have arrived safely to their recipients. There is always a risk of losing things that you mail. And so I do not recommend, maybe if you've spent hours creating a very detailed postcard, maybe deliver that one in person. But there is something to be said for the fun and excitement of receiving a novel piece of mail in the mail. So if you have like a simple postcard, mail it. It's worth it. There is a lot of discussion around people who have mailed postcards successfully and people who have had them returned or had their recipients have to pay extra money to get them delivered. And it's pretty confusing and unclear why, because the post office is not really expecting fabric postcards to be mailed, so they don't have specific instructions for those. So based on my research and understanding, and I do recommend that you do your own, but let me just kind of explain what I've learned. So a general postcard that the post office considers a postcard is about 4 by 6 inches, and they have a cheaper stamp, but that postcard has to be less than 0.016 inches thick. So your fabric postcard is not going to meet that thickness requirement. So you cannot use a discounted postcard stamp on your postcard. And if you do use it, either they're going to send it back to you undelivered, or they're going to make the person who's receiving it come into the post office and pay for the extra postage. What you can do is mail your postcard using a letter stamp, which is your standard stamp that most of us use on a regular basis. And the thickness for a letter stamp can go up to 1/4 inch. So both inside the envelope, if you're using the greeting card version, or the fabric postcard, is going to be less than 1/4 inch if you're using my method, and so that can go through. So there are size limitations. The height needs to be 3.5 inches up until 6 1/8 inch. So if you're using an envelope that is 6 by 6, it will be fine. You can send that. And then the length needs to be 5 inches up to 11.5 inches. you have that extended edge because, you know, most letter size letters need that longer length, which means that both the postcard and the greeting cards that I'm using are going to fit within those requirements for a letter stamp. And then I also have another postcard template that you can download that is for a 5x7 postcard, and that will also work within those size ranges. So most of our letters that we send through the post office are processed by machine. And as a fabric postcard, you know, maybe they will still send it through the machine. That is a risk we take. But in general, they have to be hand canceled. And so if you're asking the post office to hand cancel a thing, they have a surcharge. So currently, non-machinable mail has a hand canceling surcharge of 44 cents. So 68-cent stamp plus a 44-cent surcharge is going to land you at $1.12. So you can go into the post office and discuss with the employee behind the counter and pay that exact price if you have time, or if you are like me, you will just donate a little extra to the post office and use 2 letter stamps, because 2 letter stamps is going to be $1.36, which is going to cover your letter charge for the postcard as well as that hand canceling surcharge. Now, in theory, the 6x6-inch card is in an envelope, which means that it can be machine processed and likely will be machine processed because the post office doesn't know that there's a fabric card inside of it. So technically, you should be able to put 1 letter stamp on that and have it go through. I tend to do 2 stamps because I'm paranoid and want it to arrive quickly to the recipient. But in theory, you should be able to just put 1 stamp on it. If you're concerned about your postcard and the fabric being ruined by the post office, you can always slip it into some plastic and then put that into an envelope. And you could do the same thing with a postcard, putting it into an envelope as well. And it might reduce the potential risk of damage. I don't know, for whatever reason, I guess I trust the universe a little bit, and so far it's worked out. I do not want to add plastic to the world, but I think many of us ordering off of Etsy or other online stores will end up with a lot of plastic from our fabric deliveries, and you can reuse that plastic. So whether it's lazy or not, I take that risk and I just send my postcards. I just send them off into the world without an envelope, and they arrive safely so far. But again, if you're concerned, you have other options for just providing a little more safety for your postcard as it goes out into the world. Now, if you do use the plastic, just, adjust the pricing of your stamp accordingly. Make sure it's following the guidelines that the post office has so it arrives safely. And I do recommend you look online for different people who make other postcards, because there are a lot of really cute finishes and different tips that you can incorporate into yours and just really play with those. So I'm going to close with just a few examples of postcards that I have made, some of which you've already seen, but just to give you some ideas on what you can do. So here are my very first fabric postcards. I actually learned how to make postcards during one of my guild virtual retreats with the Silicon Valley Modern Quilt Guild. It was a virtual retreat, and they had a breakout session that taught us how to make postcards. And it was my first experience. It was really fun. They're pretty simple. You'll see the 2 here. And then this is the one that I already showed you. That is a pattern from Christy Lee of At Quiet Play. She has a Make Mine monthly membership, and she sends out super cute little mini FPP patterns, and so I turned this one into a card. And then this is an actual postcard, and I already explained that it's a fabric collage of my sister's dog. And so you go ahead and make the collage just the way you would, and then add it to a backing fabric and then put that around the postcard. This is an FPP pattern. I think it was originally designed to be an 8x8 inch block by Wendy Chow of At the Weekend Quilter. But I figured out the percentages so that it would finish within a 6 by 6 inch greeting card size, or 5.5 by 5.5. Now, if you shrink FPP patterns, do it knowing that it may end up in some like complicated tiny piecing, which I don't mind at all. Super fun. But, keep that in mind. So these are just some ideas for you to think about. When you're overwhelmed, when you're stuck with a project, when you're stressed out, or too busy, just take a break, make a quick fabric postcard, send it off to someone you love, re-energize yourself, and get back to your quilting.